earlier this year, Global Farmer Network member Andrew Osmond passed away after battling cancer. A farmer from the UK, Andrew believed in being resilient and talking very openly about his ongoing fight against his diagnosis. He continued to live life to its fullest until his last days and impacted everyone he touched. As a way to remember Andrew, we wanted to reshare his story where he talks very candidly about the power of being resilient. So, Andrew Osmond, you are a farmer in the UK, and I'm super excited to learn about your background because you do a lot of different things. It sounds like they're in the UK and you travel and you volunteer and you've just got a lot going on that we're going to learn more about today. But I'd love to start learning a little bit more about your background, the farm you're working on, what you guys grow. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, hello everybody. My nickname is Oz. I've had that since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. So um, I've been in farming all my life and raised on a farm, and we farmed in the UK primarily. So we farmed just outside a city called Winchester, which is in the south of England, and it's a family farm, family business, and on both sides of my wife Sarah, she's farming as well, and I'm farming the other side. So, but we're all farming together. So the farm is Moorcourt Farm, and it's about, in old money, it's 1,000 acres. In new, it's 400 hectares. And in the UK now, there's a lot of farming, contract farming. So we farm another 400 hectares for a near neighbour, which works out really well. He's a landowner, so we do commercial crops there. So very much family-based farm, but we do some contracting, some contract farming as well. And we also farm in a neighbouring county called Dorset. Winchester's based in Hampshire. Go a bit further southwest, and there's a beautiful county called Dorset, and we've got some land there as well.
So what are the crops you're growing on all of those acres?
Yes, well, they're not that varied, but they do vary a little bit in that on the home farm, we are primarily seed growers. So we have specialized, we've tried to add value to what we do by growing for seed and seed crops. So we would grow grass for seed, which is quite a small crop in the UK. I know in Oregon, it's the mecca of all grass seeds. And New Zealand as well, but we grow grass for seed, and they're predominantly diploid varieties. So they're forage varieties for hay, haylage, silage, that type of crop. But other farmers do grow sports amenity and things like that. But we find that type of grass seed is good. And then we grow wheat and barley for some of the bigger companies like Cargill. Frontier, they're known as Frontier in this country, but Cargill worldwide, and also Syngenta, who are now owned by somebody else. So, and that's pre-basic seed now, which is in the seeds. I'm very happy to go through the seed certification process, but it's not the most exciting thing. But anyway, we're growing seed that goes on to other farmers to multiply up, that then go on to be multiplied for commercial use. So we've kind of specialised in that. On the other farms, on the contract farms, we try and keep it simple and grow commercial crops that suit our climate and suit our soils. And so they would mainly be around wheat and barley. They would be and malting barley being the big one there, not feed. Wheat would be primarily feed wheat, not milling or bread wheat. And also our main break crop, although it has big problems with weeds and disease and pests in particular, is oilseed rape, which is canola, known as canola worldwide. So, and we're looking to grow more crops, especially protein crops. It's a big thing in the UK now that we've realised for various reasons that protein crops we need to grow more of our own, but that's way down the track, I think we'd say, for us. Yeah, so those would be our main. So we're mainly focused on combinable crops and arable crops.
I saw too, I did a little research about your operation before we started talking. I'm not even sure if I'm going to pronounce this right because I've never heard of this, but herbage lay seed.
Well, that would be, yes. I don't know why it's called. Well, it is a herb. It's herbage, isn't it? But that's the grass seed. And
Okay.
so, yeah, there are various different types from tetraploid to diploid to the amenity type turfs. And as I said, we would grow the perennial PRG, perennial ryegrass, which is a herbage lay, I suppose, in broad, and that goes for cattle, sheep grazing, and for making hay, silage, haylage as well.
Got it. I read that and I was like, I don't know if I've ever heard that term used. So that makes sense. Very interesting.
It's not used that often, really.
So you mentioned that you also grow malting barley, which is kind of fun and, the topic of today's conversation because we recently celebrated International Beer Day worldwide. And so hopefully you toasted and had a drink for celebrating that, knowing you grow the product that's going into it. But what is the process like for growing malting barley and how did you get hooked up to do that?
Well, malting barley, it's been around for a while, hasn't it? I mean, beer and whiskey production from malting barley has been around for hundreds of years, really. So it's something that we found suits our soil type, which is very much, it's a classification, it's a very chalky soil. So it's inherently low, but it's not very fertile. And that means you have a bit more control over when you apply nitrogen to a crop, you've got a little bit more control over what the protein content of the grain is going to be, because you're starting from a very low base, a zero nitrogen in the soil, perhaps one, but so you have a bit more control. And so malting barley is split into different categories depending on its protein content. So which I'm more than happy to explain, because you've got a lot of different types of beer and then you've got whiskey thrown in there as well. So we found that our soils and our climate, which is maritime, which I've mentioned a few times before, and we're having a very maritime climate at the moment with the way the weather is going in the UK. It's been a pretty wet harvest so far, but the maritime climate and the chalky soils are just perfect for malting barley. The best malting barley in the world, without doubt.
I love that. So, okay, so the protein thing, I think we need to unpack that a little bit because you mentioned focusing on growing more protein rich crops, but it sounds like that also impacts the type of beer that is being produced. Am I understanding that correctly?
Kind of, yeah. The protein crops are more leguminous crops, which soil health, it's the big thing in the UK at the moment is soil health and how we promote that with all the biology. And I'm trying to understand more in the soil, and legumes would be a big part of that, in that they potentially produce some, a nitrogen fixing if they're grown for long enough. So that will help. But the malting barley situation is very much how much nitrogen or protein is in the grain. And so depending on the growing season and how you've grown it will then dictate. It's slightly out of our hands as rain-fed agriculture is. Well, our factory hasn't got a roof, and it's very difficult to really control what's going on. But the different levels of nitrogen in barley is very much dependent on the season you're having and on the amount of nitrogen you apply. And if you then add in leguminous crops, crops that produce nitrogen, you're then in potentially a situation where you don't quite know how much nitrogen is available. And that, so it's something that we want to do. We want to grow more protein crops for the protein and for animal feeds, let alone the soil health. But then it's an interesting dynamic that you mentioned very quickly there. You're obviously all over this already. Is that, with something like malting barley, because it's so sensitive with its protein levels, if you've got a lot of background nitrogen in the soil, you don't know when that's going to be available. You don't know really when that's going to be taken up. and it's quite weather dependent. So the hitting those crucial protein contents is tricky. And I'm very happy if that's the next question to try and explain what proteins are required for what drink, whether it be whiskey.
Yeah, well, I was also wondering with the protein levels and the nitrogen impacts that and the rain impacts that, there's a lot of factors you maybe can't control for. So are you doing soil testing or plant testing to check where protein levels are at constantly?
Yeah, we are trying. I mean, the inevitable, I suppose, direction of travel, precision farming is here, isn't it? And it's only, and the amount of data that we're going to collect is just going to go off the charts. I've spoken to Rob Sake about this, who's brilliant and just all over sort of future farming, in quantum computing lands. It's just going to be, I don't understand it, but it's the amount of data that we're going to be able to process is going to become extraordinary, as long as it's good data in, good data out. But so when it comes to testing, yes, we will increase our testing of the soils. We're at quite good levels already, because we do map the fields and we do soil tests quite regularly. So we've got an idea, and our soil type, being chalky, it's not too variable. So that helps massively. But yeah, the more testing you can do of the soil, and the more testing of the plants. There's some very good diagnostic equipment available now to test the nitrogen that's actually in the plant as well, the better. And that's going to, because it's so crucial to hit the quality specs. We're being asked by our customers, the brewers and the maltsters, to hit certain bands of protein in the grain. And because our factory hasn't got a roof, it's incredibly, in rain-fed agriculture, it is incredibly difficult. But we are going down that track, aren't we? With all things in farming, the level of detail is massively increasing.
So you mentioned your factory a few times. So are you guys actually taking the crop and then turning that into beer, or are you distributing mash? Or
no, I'd love to. I mentioned the factory thing. It's just that my farm is a factory.
Got it.
And
okay.
It hasn't got a roof, so
yes.
I can't control anything. We're in rain-fed agriculture, and it rains when it wants to, and it might not be at the right time. And if it does rain, and then nitrogen is then suddenly available to the plant, and it takes it all up in a massive rush. So that's what I mean by the factory element. No, it's something though that some farmers in the UK have got involved with. It's that added value in the marketplace all the time. We're very much producers, aren't we, as farmers? And I think some farmers don't necessarily like that, and the fact that you lose control of your product, you don't know what you're going to get paid, etc. So if you can actually keep hold of it, that primary malting barley, and then turn it into malt, and then brew your own beer as well, then sell it, which some farmers are doing. It's direct access to market, and it's got a great story. It's just a great story, and you can trace it back, to the farm, to the field. Your beer came from lower, higher, middle paddock or whatever, and it's just a good story, isn't it?